that's what I wanted to do is to make sure, first of all, that if you're not already a member, that you become a member of Frontiers. You register at frontiersctsi.org and stay abreast of pilot grant funding opportunities, training opportunities, and just general networking with colleagues at all of our Frontiers affiliated institutions. Yeah, and signing up is very easy. Just follow the instructions here. Just go to frontierctsi.org and click on to be a member. It takes about 30 seconds to do that and stay up to date and join all your colleagues in the Kansas research colleagues in the KC metro area. Ashley, can you give us our next slide? Okay, I also want to make sure that you should be getting this message, and let us know if you're not getting these messages. If you're part of Frontiers and you're not getting these messages, you should be hearing about each of our Research and Discovery Grand Rounds events. Really excited. I've been pushing really hard to get this event for next month on June 27th. For our research informatics group to talk about cohort identification and recruitment. Primarily, they'll be talking about our efforts through the EPIC EHR and a lot of the new strategies that we can use, not only to identify cohorts, but also how to reach out and engage them as you're thinking about a research study. So this should be a very pragmatic learning opportunity for anybody interested in learning more about research within our patient populations. If for any reason you can't make that, I also want you to be aware that all of our Research and Discovery Grand Rounds are recorded, including today's presentation will be recorded and available on the Frontiers website. Again, that's just at frontiersctsi.org. So become a member, look at some of our past Research and Discovery Grand Rounds. There were some great presentations for you to take advantage of. And with that, I think I'll turn it over and we can actually get Dr. Tifo to pop up his slides. While he's doing that, I just want to introduce our guest today. Is Dr. John Tifo, who's a professor at the University of Kansas Medical Center in the Department of Cellular Biology and Physiology and in the Department of Internal Medicine in the Division of Endocrinology. His translational research addresses mitochondrial energetics, obesity, and exercise physiology in both animal and human models. His broad theme of research focuses on the mechanisms by which exercise, physical activity, and aerobic capacity reduce susceptibility to obesity, chronic diseases associated with insulin resistance, and for my interest in particular, the neurometabolic deficits associated with aging. Of particular interest to us today is Dr. Tifo's role as the co-director of one of our three COBREs, the Kansas Center for Metabolism and Obesity Research. And without any further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Tifo.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here today. I have a brand new computer, so it's being funky. So hopefully this works out. All right, so it's my pleasure to introduce and talk about the KC-MORE. The KC-MORE stands for Kansas Center for Metabolism and Obesity Research. It's a COBRE grant, and I'm just going to basically go through the origins of the grant. But to start, the focus is really on human obesity, metabolism, and energy balance, and then the basic mechanisms of how obesity and metabolic-related diseases occur. And in our COBRE, our center, KC-MORE Center, we really try to integrate basic clinical, behavioral, and population health investigators into one team. So it really does fit the Frontiers theme very well. So if you're not familiar with idea states are those states, I think it's 33 states that have the lowest NIH funding. And the way this was explained to me several years ago was there was actually a senator who was concerned that all the NIH money was on the coast. And it wasn't so much that was the problem. The idea was that we were losing scientific talent from investigators throughout the middle of the country. And for a small town boy like me from Western Kansas, that totally is something that's true. I never was exposed to biomedical research growing up or knew that it was a career path. And so what they did to fix that problem is they have these idea programs. And one of them is called the Centers of Biomedical Research Excellence. And I'll explain a little bit more what that is. The other is these idea networks, or embrace, they're called embrace states. And we have an embrace program. Doug Wright is our PI for that. And the idea is to just get NIH dollars to not only the places like KU Med, but to all the primary undergraduate institutions throughout the state to try to really get junior people into research. And there's other components with that as well. They actually have their own CTSA program, if you're not aware of that. They have their own pediatric clinical trial network, which Ann Davis is a big part of. And they have other supplement funding. But today we're going to really talk about the COBRE mechanisms. And the COBRE mechanism is really to build research capacity in states and territories. Well, the idea program overall is to build research capacity in states and territories with lower levels of NIH funding so they can so they can compete with the powerhouses on the coast. These COBRE grants specifically are to support some kind of broadly themed research center where there's strengths already on campus for that, but it could grow bigger and stronger. And it's designed to both improve infrastructure and to bring junior investigators in as faculty. There's 3 sequential phases, each 5 years long. The first phase is the phase we're in, which is developing cores for the infrastructure and recruiting and helping junior faculty get R01s. Phase 2 is a similar idea. And then phase 3, the recruiting and the support of junior faculty goes away, but the cores keep getting supported. And then the idea is that the whole thing is really strong. The cores are self-sustaining. You have 10 to 15 junior faculty who are now mid-career and are NIH investigators that are well known in the field. So that's kind of the whole idea of the COBRE program. And I've already, this is just more information on that. I'm not going to belabor that anymore. But the key measure of the COBRE success as you move along is that RPLs actually graduate. And what that means is they get an R01. So once they get an R01, or they can also get other significant funding, or usually with they're on the program for no more than 3 years. Then they move off, and at least they have pubs and some kind of independent funding so they can have a productive career. So the timeline for the Casey Moore COBRE, there was this was under previous leadership in March 2020. There was a call for letters of intent for proposed COBREs. And the way it kind of works is, you try to pick an area where there is already some existing strengths. And then you try to see what your bullpen looks like. And what I mean by that is you have to have 3 or 4 junior investigators who don't yet have R01s, but are highly competitive for R01 funding in the next 3 to 4 years. That's kind of the key linchpin to all this. And then you design a theme and you design cores that support all that. So we submitted our letter of intent in 2020. We were selected in August of 2020 to go in. The application was submitted January of 2021. It got reviewed in July of 2021. So you wait 5 to 6 months to hear your score, and then you wait almost a whole year before you get funded. So we got funded in April of 2022, and we are currently starting our 3rd year of funding. Our aims are to establish the Casey Moore as a scientific home for research focused on metabolism, obesity, and obesity-induced disease conditions. Obviously, we want to identify and mentor future leaders of these conditions at KUMC. And then the 3rd aim is to continuously evaluate and improve the Casey Moore to meet the needs of not only the people, the junior investigators, which we call those research project leaders or RPLs, but also to evaluate how we're supporting obesity research across campus. We want to pull people into our web and support them to grow research. We had this in our grant. This is kind of looking at different centers and departments on campus. And the blue is departments and centers that we integrated into the Casey Moore infrastructure. So you have the Diabetes Institute, KPIM, Chillin, Center for Physical Activity, Weight Management, and Department of Dietetics and Nutrition and Liver Center all had existing infrastructure that we leveraged into the Casey Moore. And then we tried to sell that the things in yellow would benefit and interact with the Casey Moore directly. Not that other things wouldn't, but that these would. I guess there's not an established pain center, but there's definitely an established pain group. You have the Kidrick Kidney Institute, Alzheimer's Disease Center, Cancer Center, and of course Frontiers, who I'm talking to today. So we really think that, obesity and metabolic dysfunction play such a centerpiece in so many different disease conditions that a center focused on this is really necessary for research growth at KU Med. This is our leadership team. The grant was primarily written by myself and Steve Wyman, and we serve as the multi-PIs for the grant. But Dr. Joe Donnelly played a major role, in his background and reputation in obesity research obviously played a major strength in our success. And so he also played a big role in writing the application, and he is the director of our steering committee. So really, we consider the three of us to be, I guess, the top shelf leadership for the Casey Moore, but we have a broader research team or leadership team that also includes Alice Zhang, Ann Davis, Paige Geiger, and Udayan Apti. In particular, Dr. Davis is the director of mentoring in our didactic training program, and Dr. Geiger is the director of our pilot funding program and one of the core directors, and Udayan's one of the core directors. Allison Zhang is the director of our diversity inclusion program. And unfortunately, because she's, I think, got KL2 funding, she's actually going to have to step down from that role. So we'll be replacing Alice, but she's been an excellent member of the team. You also have to have an external advisory committee. Because our COBRE is set up to be translational and have both clinical and basic science, we really want to be cognizant of that with the design of our EAC. So we have Jim Hill from UAB, a really famous obesity researcher, Nick Davison, very famous hepatologist, lipid biology researcher, Catherine Kotz, who's an excellent neuroscientist studying causes of obesity, very in basic research models, Jackie Stevens, who's very famous in adipose biology, and also runs her own COBRE at Pennington. And then Stella Volpe, who really bridges exercise and nutrition research and human subjects. So you want to have content expertise that fits and supports your center, also supports your junior investigators, but you also want them to have an understanding of what a COBRE is and how it functions. So it's critical to really think about how you design this. So what do they do for us? So every year we have a visit by the EAC, where the RPLs present their projects and their progress and get feedback. And then when the RPLs are here for that, they give us a review of our program that we then submit to KU Med leadership, and we also submit to NIGMS, and that's necessary for our RPPR. And then they review our pilot grants, which I'll talk about later. They actually choose our pilot grants. And then finally, they have to also approve our RPL selections. When people graduate and we have to replace them, they approve our submissions. Okay, so what are these research project leaders? So they can be non-tenure track, but it's best. It looks like more of a commitment by the university if they are tenure track, but you can be either a research assistant or tenure track to be one of these. You have to be either early stage investigator or NI status. Newly recruited faculty are particularly desirable because it shows that you're bringing people to campus to grow things and not leveraging people that are already here on campus anyway, but you can definitely use people who are already here. And the idea is that they're expected to obtain R01 funding by year 3, but also other large grants are considered successful and can spur graduation from the RPL status. And the success of the program to mentor and develop these RPLs is the most important aspect of the COBRE. So this was our initial RPL group when we went in: Seth Halwerda, Matt Morris, Anna Gorsica, and Hongmin Ni. And if you notice, we have 2 clinical human researchers in Seth and Anna, and we have Matt and Hongmin, who are both very basic researchers. And that is a goal of our program going forward, is that we always have 2 basic and 2 clinical. Seth got an R01 before we even got our grant scored, so we consider that a success. Hongmin got an R01 soon after we were funded. And then last year, Anna got her R01 funded. So we've already graduated 3 RPLs. Our current RPLs retain that same 2 clinical, 2 basic. Now I have my clinical on the left side. So our current RPLs are Felicia Steger, who is in the KU Diabetes Institute and the Department of Internal Medicine. She also has a co-appointment in dietetics nutrition, and she is studying nutritional interventions for type 2 diabetes. Chelsea Cracked is a brand new faculty member on campus. She was recruited to Division of Physical Activity and Weight Management and Internal Medicine. And she does really cool studies on lifestyle behavioral interventions that cover sleep, diet, and activity. I'll talk a little bit about her project. She was a very impressive recruit from previously trained at Pennington. Matt Morris is in cell biology and physiology, and I'll talk about his basic science project, which is very interesting. And then about 10 months ago, no, exactly a year ago, actually, we recruited Andrew Lukwitty, also to KU Diabetes Institute in internal medicine, and he's working on adipose tissue liver crosstalk. So I want to talk about each of these real quick so everyone knows what kind of research they're doing. What's really impressive about our RPLs is they already have substantial funding. So Felicia Steger was awarded an American Diabetes Association Junior Faculty Award, and she was able to leverage that funding with her COBRE funding to make her project even bigger. So that was a nice that both the ADA and the NIGMS let her kind of leverage the funding together for her project. And her project is looking at intermittent energy restriction versus time restricted eating for the treatment of type 2 diabetes and obesity. So this is a time restricted feeding has been a really hotly studied thing in the obesity world, but it really hasn't been studied for metabolic disease outcomes. So she's really focusing on whether or not it can improve glycemic control. And I think she's in her third wave of recruitment and enrollment in her study, and all her outcomes will be finishing up this summer, and she plans to write an R01 in the fall or the spring. Chelsea Cracked, as I said, is brand new to campus. She has a K99 that is transitioning to the R01 as she came to campus. And she is looking at ecological momentary assessments to uncover complex relationships between energy intake, physical activity, and sleep behavior. And I cannot, talk about her trial. She's the expert on this. So if you have any interest in what she's working on, I suggest you reach out to her, but it seems really cool and really technologically advanced. Then for our basic science investigators, Matt Morris has a K01, and so he's also funded. And he is studying a really unique interaction between how liver defects in liver metabolism that are caused by obesity then change the ability of the liver to relay to the brain that you're full. And so he's studying this pathway that involves sodium potassium pumps, membrane polarization, and then eventually vagal afferent activity, which is supposed to occur normally and cause satiety and cause you to stop eating a meal. And he is investigating how defects in liver metabolism affect that whole pathway from being compromised and eventually leading to more obesity. And then the last one is Andrew Lukwitty, who I said we recruited from WashU about a year ago. He also has a K, and he is actually combining basic science with animal models and tissue acquisition and clinical samples. And he's basically looking at how adipose and liver metabolism have this close working relationship. And so we know that too much adipose causes liver disease, but we also know with lipodystrophy and other diseases of dysfunctional adipose, there also is liver disease. And so he's basically studying the relationship between adipose dysfunction and liver disease using animal models. And then in AIM-2, he has samples from other places, but he's also planning on obtaining here from surgery samples, small pieces of liver and adipose from different adipose depots, and then getting those from lean patients and obese patients, and probably some patients that have dysfunctional adipose, and doing large omics systems biology approaches to figure out mechanisms of action. So when they graduate, then we have to replace them, and that can be a really that can be the sticky wicket, right? How do we get university leadership, or how do we get departments to want to take on new faculty? How do we find those resources? So far, we've been lucky to have open positions on campus that have obesity, nutrition, metabolism themes. But what we do is if we're trying to get people from campus, we have an open competition with letter of intent and aims page. It's reviewed by our steering committee and the EAC, and then we make a decision on who's appointed. Oftentimes, we are leveraging this as a carrot for recruitment for people, that they will have the opportunity to get on this, and so that seems to be appealing to recruits. Right now, we have one current recruit open in the KU Diabetes Institute. There's another recruit in neurology and one more recruit in biochemistry. None have signed yet, but all would be great fits for the KC Moore COBRE. And then we also know of junior faculty in Division of Physical Activity and Weight Management and in physical therapy. And I won't name names, but they would also be great candidates. So we feel like we have a good, solid, both basic and clinical RPL pipeline going forward. All right, so we also have the mentoring and didactic training program, which is led by Ann Davis. And if you don't know about how effective of a mentor Ann is, she's led multiple people to help them get KO1s and mentor them through the process of getting the KO1 and conducting the KO1 and moving forward with the R1. She's a very dedicated mentor, and we're lucky to have her here on campus. So we're actually really lucky to have her play a role in the KC Moore. And so she's been running a mentoring program since the grant started. It hasn't worked great. So she's actually decided to implement the Frontiers model that you all use for the TL1 and KL2 program going forward. And so that will be occurring. The other thing, and I help lead this with Ann, is that we have didactic training. And the reason I help lead this with Ann is that I co-direct a T32 grant with Doug Wright, and in that grant, we also proposed didactic training to teach, the trainees about all things research and making it in a research career. So we've decided to combine forces where we use the TOMADs and the COBRE RPL, the TOMADs predocs and the KC Moore RPLs all come together, and bi-monthly we have training sessions. And so in the past so far, these are some of the things we've talked about: NIH diversity supplements, navigating your NIH budget, bias in reviewing, IRB navigation, IACUC navigation, and then you can see, and then we're going to talk about P&T this summer. And then these are things that the students or the trainees have brought up that they would like help with going forward. So if this is something we could collaborate with Frontiers on down the road, that'd be great. We're also open to anybody who wants to attend these to let us know. They're on Zoom and in person, but I think it's been great. They're learning about things I didn't know about until I was probably 5 years into my, as an assistant professor. Okay, so the last kind of component here I want to talk about is the research cores that we have in the KC Moore. We have 3 cores. One is called the Human Energy Balance Core. It's directed by Joe Donnelly, but it also has several co-directors, which I'll talk about. There's the Cell, Tissue, Bioanalysis, and Biostatistics Core. That's directed by Udayan Apte, co-directed by Steve Weinman. And then there's the Metabolism Core, which is directed by Paige Geiger and co-directed, supposed to say John Tifo, co-directed by myself. Okay, so first, the Human Energy Balance Core. As it implies, this is all things clinical and human. These are some of the team members, the faculty members from the Division of Physical Activity and Weight Management who are a part of the core. They each have different expertise in nutrition, exercise, interventions, physical activity measurements. And so they use this core uses a kind of a multidisciplinary team to run the core. And these are some of the activities that you can do through the core: supervised exercise interventions, energy expenditure, physical activity measurements, body composition analysis, biomarker assessment. And then there's also the whole dietary assessment and intervention side as well, which is, I don't have Deb Sullivan's picture on here, but Deb Sullivan plays a major role in that. I should have had her picture on here as well. And these are some of the grants they've supported and the number of tests they've done in the last year. Actually, tons of tests, tons of programs they help support through this infrastructure. They also, as you probably know, have a clinical weight management program in the division, and so it's unique that they basically partner with the clinical weight management program to ask research questions and to use that as a conduit for research. This is some information on their provider team and the different people that refer to the KU Weight Management Clinic. And I think this is what makes this core really unique, is that it's not just research based, it's got a foot in the clinical side of things as well. And then one of the things I didn't mention with the COBREs is that you can actually apply for $300,000 in renovations. And Dr. Donnelly wrote a renovation grant as a part of our application. And so they recently just got the Kermeyer building to be modified and improved for their research. And that was funded half through this renovation supplement and half through university support. Okay, so the next core is the metabolism core. This is the core that I help run with Paige Geiger. The scientific leader of this core who runs it on a day-to-day basis is Colin McCohen, who's a research assistant professor in cell biology and physiology. And the idea behind the metabolism core is to be basically the preclinical equivalent of the human energy balance core. So they can measure energy expenditure, they can do exercise tests, they can do body composition, and they can do food and energy intake assessments and interventions. We can do all the same thing in mouse and rat models, so that if you want to do a translational study across species, you can do that. And then on top of that, we add measures of mitochondrial energetics in tissues or in cells acquired from blood, like PBMCs. And then we also offer at least the ability to design isotopic metabolic analysis studies in rodents and humans. So we have a really great set of tools. And I'm sorry, these aren't all the same colors. I didn't fix that. But we have a really great set of tools that were both combination of a startup package for me 9 years ago, plus what's called a Cypher S10 grant that we got about 4 years ago that bought us about $1 million in equipment. So these are the indirect telemetry systems that mice or rats live in, and every second it measures their oxygen consumption, their CO2 production, how they move, how much they eat. And then you can actually do running wheel studies in these cages. So you can really use these to figure out energy balance in mouse and rat models. Then we can keep the cages in these environmental temperature chambers where we can control the temperature and we can control the humidity and the light cycle. We also have these thermoneutral housing cages. If you're not aware, mice actually have a lower thermoneutral temperature than us. And so when we keep them at our room temperature, they're actually cold and they have about a 50% elevated energy expenditure. So one of the things we've really focused on here is having the ability for all our investigators, if they want, to keep their mice at thermoneutral. And Michael Van Son has shown here that really leads to much more aggressive pancreatic tumors occurring in his preclinical mouse models than if they're cold, which seems to give them metabolic protection and tumorigenic protection. Another device we have is this BioDAC system, which gives real-time food intake measurements over time. And then this body composition analyzer, which allows us to measure fat mass and fat-free mass non-invasively in rodents. And you can do that day after day or weekly. We have exercise intervention. These are the wheels we can use or the treadmills we can use. And then this new system I'm going to talk about is a DSI telemetry system that you put these probes in the mice and you can measure continuous glucose, EKG, blood pressure, body temperature, things like that. I'm going to skip that. So this is the DSI telemetry probes. If you're not familiar, continuous glucose monitoring is basically just a probe in the interstitial space in humans, and you get minute-to-minute glucose measures. But in rodents, you can do it as well with these probes that you place. The probes also can tell you body temperature. So Dr. Olivia Eller, who is a research assistant professor on our floor, is using heat therapy in mice as a treatment for spinal cord injury. She can do the heat therapy in our temperature cabinets, and then she can actually measure the animal's heat. And these are animals that have either had a spinal cord injury induced or have not. She can measure that the heat therapy is actually getting body temperature elevated. And then this is the continuous glucose monitors. You actually have to put a probe in the aorta. So Julie Allen in my lab is a surgical expert and is fine-tuning the ability to do this. It's very expensive, but very really unique data that you can get minute-to-minute glucose in your mouse models. And then Seth Alwerda is also doing research in animal models, and these probes can also measure blood pressure. And so he's developing this model in his research. And then one of the things that I want to really give the university a shout out for is that number one, we've been given animal space where we have multiple rooms in a row for all this equipment. So it's not just all over the RSF, it's actually all put together in one wing. And then we've also been supported by the university since I've been here in increasing the temperature of some of these rooms, so we don't have to use those temperature cabinets. The whole room is more warm, so that we can get our mouse make our mouse studies and rat studies more human relevant. Okay, the last core I'm going to talk about is the CTBB core. And this is kind of the idea here. The two main things of the core is that it's to help people who don't have a wet lab to be able to do assays for them. And the second part is to be able to help researchers get human tissues from surgery samples and things like that. And then the third part would be to actually do help with the bioinformatics or the biostatistics of those outcomes. So Udayan calls it a one-stop stop for translational research. You get IRB support, work with clinicians to obtain samples, storage and distribution of the samples, and provide bioanalysis and then statistical support. This is the setup of the CTBB core. We have the clinical collaborators, and then there's the people in the lab. There are research coordinator experts who get the tissues, get the IRB approval. Then there's technicians who do the bioanalysis. So if you want to measure insulin or cortisol or whatever thing you want to measure in both rodent or human samples, they can do this for you, and they have different machinery to do it. They can even isolate RNA and do gene expression in different tissues. And then this is where we connect with the precision medicine COBRE, is that they have a biostats core. And we basically use two statisticians, Dong Pai and Yangmin Li. They're supported by our COBRE as well, and they provide statistical analysis for us. And then the old COBRE, the previous COBRE that the Liver Center had established a tissue acquisition banking system for getting liver samples, and we're now expanding that to getting liver and adipose samples from surgeries. And so they already have thousands of tissues banked in this repository. And so if you ever have interest in that, you can reach out to Udayan. And then India Barnett is the new analysis core director. And one of the things they actually applied for and received a equipment grant to get a Luminex-based analysis system, which allows you to do 3 or 4 hormones at once in a blood sample. And then this is information on biostats. Okay, lastly, I'm going to talk about the pilot program, and then we'll open it up for questions. Dr. Paige Geiger runs the pilot program. And the idea here is to bring people into our web to support either junior investigators who are doing obesity and metabolism research, or support senior investigators who previously haven't been in this research space but want to move into it. So right now what we have is 2 $50,000 grants each year. That's funded actually by the university. That was a part of our application, was to get that promise from university. The eligibility, as I said, new investigators without R01 funding, or established investigators who have not previously worked in the field. Or we also want to keep it open to very novel work. Again, we have the candidates submit a one-page letter of intent. The steering committee then decides which letters of intent go forward. And then we time it up so that the applications come in right before the EAC visits, and then they've already read them, and then the applicants then give a presentation at the EAC meeting, a 20-minute presentation at the EAC meeting, where the EAC can ask them questions. And then after that, the EAC decides who we should fund, and we usually agree with them. So in 2022, we funded Steve Herman on a project looking at knee replacement and weight loss interventions to improve outcomes. We also funded Lindsay Kuhn, who's in Lawrence at the Lifespan Institute, on a high intensity functional training intervention for people with disabilities who have overweight or obesity. And then this last year, we funded Renee Rogers from here on campus, looking at GLP-1 agonists and how they affect muscle quantity and quality. That's a really hot topic. The people on those drugs tend to lose more muscle mass than typical caloric restriction induced weight loss. And so it's a big concern. And then we also funded Daniel Prente from Family Medicine, and he's investigating the pharmacogenomics of metformin and obesity and type 2 diabetes. And he's doing that a lot with the All of Us database. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is that we realized that there was at least 3 different seminar series on campus that were covering obesity, nutrition, metabolism themes. There was the Center for Children's Healthy Lifestyle, the KU Diabetes Institute, which I also lead, and then these KC Moore. I wanted to have KC Moore seminars. So what we're proposing to do is all about these teams have decided to work together to start a new seminar series called KC Dons, Diabetes, Obesity, Nutrition Seminars. Each of these centers will host one of the seminars, but it'll be every Friday at noon. You'll know from this summer on, there's going to be something every Friday at noon, and it'll either be from one of the 3 of us. The seminars will be funded by Chillin and Casey Moore, and then the DI has been doing what are called Mod Chalk Talks for several years, and those will be works in progress and feedback where you can get feedback on grants, aims, or experiments or new ideas. So this will all be starting this summer. So keep an eye out for Casey Dons. All right, so that's all I have for today. I'll take any questions you might have.
That was wonderful. You covered so much in such a short period of time. Could you tell us just a little bit more? So what I didn't catch is the grant development seminars versus the KC Dons. Is that they're all going to be on Friday at noon?
Yeah, they're all going to be at Friday at noon. So yeah, and we'll just take turns, which each center will still be able to call, their session theirs, but it'll be under the umbrella of Casey Dons. So there'll be one mod Chalk Talk a month. And I guess I don't know what Friday that is, but these announcements will start coming out. And if anybody wants to be on these distribution lists, they can contact me.
That's wonderful. Okay, so basically, if we want to be on the contact list, just drop you an email.
Yep.
Okay, that was my big question. Okay, I'm just trying to monitor the chat here and see, because otherwise I'll fill up the whole time asking questions. Okay, so I think a question about the pilot program. This is one of the things I wanted to ask you about too. How does somebody get to know that the pilots are available? When can they apply? Where can they apply? And then also, who's eligible? Frontiers covers K-State, KU Lawrence, KUMC, and UMKC. What's the eligibility here?
I'm pretty sure that we want to keep the pilot program with KU Med or KU Lawrence only because K-State has their own COBRE programs on campus. But I will check into that to make sure. Because it is funded by KU Med, it's actually directly funded by KU Med and not by the NIGMS. I think that would also be the case. But you may want to look into what, because there is a somewhat obesity stress related COBRE at K-State that might fit Maria's question.
Okay. And then for UMKC, I know Missouri isn't eligible, but what if they live in Kansas, or let's say, for example, that they have, at Children's Mercy, they have a dual appointment.
I think we could work it out if they have a dual appointment, but the grant cannot run through CMH or any institution on the Missouri side. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then, yeah, that addressed 2 of my questions. We fortunately have Holly Zink on the line. I don't know if she wanted to say anything, but she's been heading a lot of our career development training programs. So I'm hoping that she can work with Ann Davis on developing some cross programmatic efforts. I think we could probably learn both ways.
For sure.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And then I think this would be another question about the cores. It looks like your cores aren't just serving your research project leads and your pilot applicants. It looks like you actually get credit for providing services to lots of people. How do other people potentially take advantage of those cores and frankly, all those toys and stuff that you were describing related to what you do with mice?
Yeah, so we try to advertise the things that our cores can do through the core showcase, which is more, I shouldn't say it seems to be more of a basic science thing here, but there's a core showcase once a year that the Dean of Research holds to try to get researchers to know about what cores are available on campus. But you can actually just search Casey Moore MetCore, and we have a website and we have a contact email there that you can find us.
Okay.
Does that answer? I mean, yeah, so we're on the web. I do need to start going around to different departments and talking about our capabilities. It just seems like no matter how much you try to advertise things, it's hard for people to, and I'm the same way as an investigator. I don't know about all the cores on campus. So if we could advertise through Frontiers, that would be great. But all these different sessions you join, you see different faculty. I actually don't know a lot of the faculty on here today, which is great because then that's new exposure for Casey Moore.
Okay, wonderful. And Ashley just listed where the cores are, so and has the link there if you're interested in that. Whitney, you feel free to come off mute if you want to ask your question directly. But I think this may get to the idea of tissue repositories and the human adipose and liver tissues available. What do you actually have? How did somebody learn more about that?
Yeah, thanks for addressing. I'm just curious, as someone that's working in some of the sleep studies and weight management we currently have ongoing, to kind of double down on tissues that we wouldn't be able to get a hold of in clinical trials, but clearly you have adipose and liver tissue samples available. So if we could perhaps take advantage to measure adipose and liver in obese individuals that perhaps have various sleep disorders, would we be able to tease out that information with your samples?
So I will say this, that because the liver center had been collecting liver for a number of years, we are just now starting to collect adipose. We're actually going through the IRB process. We had a really fruitful conversation with the general surgeons about a month ago. It's all green light or go. This is something that my colleagues at other universities do. As you can expect, most people will openly consent for you to take adipose out of their bodies while they're having open surgeries or laparoscopic surgeries. So it's still kind of in the development phase, but we'd love to talk to you about how to support your research, Whitney, on those questions. We're kind of just starting out, taking them from any open surgeries. It's going to be a lot of pancreatic surgeries to start, it sounds like, and they promise us they have all shapes and sizes of people that go through those surgeries. And the way it'll work is that the tissues will be acquired and we'll actually have the participants' information withheld within the center, and so we'll be able to look at EMR in relationship to those tissues. But then if we ever give them out to investigators for these kinds of studies, we would de-identify them. But we could still give information like, non-PHI information like BMI, and maybe if they had a sleep disorder in their medical records or not.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then being able to perhaps, discern between adiposity, right? Visceral as opposed to subcutaneous, right?
Yeah, and that's what Andrew's research does, is he looks at the bad guy adipose, which is visceral, versus the kind of healthy adipose, which is subcutaneous.
Right.
And I want to say real quick, Lisette, I had a slide and I forgot to throw it in, but NIGMS also has yearly administrative supplements, which are basically like 1 year of an R01 on women's health. And Lisette got one a couple years ago. And we had Christy Brown applied for one this last year as well. So, and she actually got a JIT, so I think it's going to get funded. So that is another thing that we really try to stay on top of every year to get one of those in. Oh, where will the Dawn Summer Series be held? We're trying to get HEB. Sometimes we have to do Wall Hall. East, but I prefer HEB. And then I think they're always on Zoom. Yeah, they'll always be on Zoom. And then we'll try to have lunches with almost every one of them as well.
Could you talk a little bit more about the career pathways? I'm interested in two things. One is when somebody applies for a pilot grant, is that frequently a transition then from a pilot to an RPL, or are you anticipating that a pilot is going to lead to an RO1?
We could see it both ways. I think it depends on the person and the project, but it could definitely lead to them becoming an RPL, or it could lead to them, getting a grant. And we've talked about it, but we haven't codified it in terms of we want to provide the same mentorship to the pilot awardees as we provide to the RPLs. It really kind of depends on them seeking out that mentorship, because it's not as structured, but we really want to, that would be a win as well. And when we put it in our renewal, we would definitely celebrate that if our pilot awardees got RO1s from our funding.
And then on a related note, you described how a bunch of individuals that became your RPLs or research project leads were K awardees, already K awardees. Can you tell me, is this something you would apply for in year one of your K, or when would you do it?
Great question.
How much effort is required as an RPL, and how does that potential transition work?
That's a great question. So as you know, with KO1s, I think you have to be 90% on the KO1 until halfway through or year 3. So you cannot have a K and be on our COBRE until your year 3 of your K, because the COBRE requires you at least have 50% effort. And I think Ks require you at least have 80 or 90% effort that first 2 years. So
Yeah,
it is kind of
75 would be
is
what
it
it is.
75? Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
It is
and
kind of
then
a delicate process. Yeah.
yeah, and then you can cut down to 50%, I think, in the last 2 years. Of course, then that means you're going to be 100% funded, so you don't have any room for anything else then. So any time within those last 2 years would, okay.
Yep. And it used to be that K99 R00s were not eligible. And then I think NIGMS changed it 2 or 3 years ago because they realized that was de-incentivizing bringing great people to IMBRE state or IDEA states. So they got smart and allowed it.
Okay. And then is the COBRE eligible for diversity supplements?
I think the IDEA program or the IMBRE program does have diversity. I know they have diversity supplements, but they don't route them through the COBRE program. But if you go to the IMBRE website, they do have diversity supplement opportunities.
And I do have one last question, but I know Dr. Castro turned on his camera, so I don't know if he had something he was going to chime in, but.
Comment. I just it's a wonderful mechanism. John, what do you think with this new so is it renewed again for or going to go up for renewal for the next cycle soon?
Yeah, well, I think we'll write it next spring, so a year from now, and then that would give us a whole year where we're still funded to get it renewed.
And will you be identifying new scholars RPLs at that time?
Yeah, we'll be figuring out. Yeah, we'd probably be transitioning to all new. Yeah. And hopefully some of these recruits sign, they've got offer letters. And so they would be here, maybe a year or two, but not yet RO1 funded. So they'd be great. They'd look great on paper, because that's a big component. You want to have a really good cohort of RPLs going in. And then another really strange caveat with all this, and I guess this happened in Lawrence, is you want to go in with 4, because if one of them gets an RO1 before you get awarded, they won't fund you if you only have 2. So sometimes COBREs, they go in with 3, but if one of them gets an RO1, they won't get the COBRE because then they only have 2, if that makes sense. And that happened with a group at KU Lawrence, and it blows my mind, because there's writing these things is such a big deal, and then you wait so long, and to have something small like that affect you. But I've talked to COBRE leaders at some of these other, really small states, and it really is a struggle to get 3 or 4 investigators that look really solid, you know, for these submissions. So it's a challenge at different places. We, you know, at KU Med, we're obviously a successful place, especially compared to other states that can take advantage of this. So we do really well.
Well, I would encourage you to use it as a recruitment mechanism for other divisions and departments, and certainly bringing in other systems into play, like the Lunds. That would be great.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and we're totally open to people reaching out to us and talking to us. If they, you know, if your division wants to recruit someone in that space, we'd be happy to talk to you about it, and we could tell you kind of the time frame of what availability we think would be open. For example, we know we're going to have a basic science position, a spot open next year. Felicia, I'm pretty confident, you know, in a year or two will be funded. So it's somewhat guessing, right, about what's going to be available, but it is a good recruiting tool. It's interesting when I talk to the junior faculty that we're recruiting, some of them think it's a great thing and some of them just don't understand it or don't care to understand it. So it doesn't seem to have any impact on them. But you know, that's just how it is.
Yeah, it would seem, Mario, that there could be some opportunities with your sleep group and others. Certainly the Alzheimer's Disease Center and the Cancer Center might be interested in this too, which brought up my last question, which was, you didn't talk much about the overlap with the Cancer Center, the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. Can you comment a little bit about how you might be working together with them on projects?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, our Alzheimer's Disease Center is kind of, I think there's 26 of them across the country. They're well known to be the one that really cares about lifestyle, metabolism, and mitochondrial energetics. So they're obviously a direct fit, and several of us, me included, collaborate with them on different projects. Like I wrote a PPG with Jill Morris and Heather Wilkins that gets reviewed this summer. But yeah, we haven't. One of the RPLs that's being recruited by neurology would be a potential fit for this. So that's how we could grow that. From the cancer side, Dr. Jensen has been very motivated to grow obesity and metabolism research through the Cancer Center and to link with Casey Moore and the Diabetes Institute. And so, you know, there's two junior faculty, Jennifer Davis and Michael Van Son, who both do really nice preclinical work on obesity and cancer. And then, of course, Christy Beffert. And there's other people doing breast cancer, obesity research. And then lastly, Dr. Jensen pulled the trigger on a big recruit this last year, Christy Brown, who's on my floor. And Christy's a very well-known obesity breast cancer researcher that spans basic to clinical. And so he's told me he's very motivated to continue to support obesity metabolism research on campus. So we look to go to him for, you know, more recruits down the road and more opportunities to collaborate. But yeah, we need to keep working on tangible, real things with these centers.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, this was absolutely fantastic. I think we may be trying to get some presentations from our two other COBREs. They offer so much in terms of resources and opportunities for junior faculty, for recruitment, and also just the excitement of the types of research projects that are ongoing. And so I'm actually very curious that when we have these Friday noon dawn meetings, we'll hear more about the progress on some of these research projects that you described. But this was just an absolutely fantastic kickoff to the COBRE mechanism, and something we really need to we just need to be aware of. It's critical to building up our reproductive health and our liver center research in the past, and now we've got 3 new themes that are really moving forward, and thanks to this mechanism.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody. Feel free to reach out to me if you've got ideas for future research and discovery grand round presentations. Make sure you tune in June for our discussion about from our informatics team on subject recruitment and subject cohort identification. And thanks for joining us. And thanks again, Dr. Tifo, for presenting.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate it.